Hello everyone. In this video I will be sharing with you some general considerations for using the board. First, let's start with a little background. Well, the first person credited with using walls of a classroom to write was Reverend Samuel Reed Hall in 1816. In his school, well, he first started writing on dark paper. Then he had the plaster on the walls of his classroom painted black. So the concept of a blackboard emerged from this idea. Here you can see a picture of one of his old boards. You can still see some of the writing. You can see part of the plaster is falling off. And he's also credited with having invented the eraser for the blackboard. Now let's look at types of boards. Probably you're familiar or still familiar with wooden boards. They're usually green or black. They provide good contrast with the chalk. There are acrylic boards or white boards. They are probably the most common type of boards right now. Then in some places you might find glass boards that are movable boards. They have wheels, or they can be just posted on the wall and you can roll them up. Now you can also find walls with special paint, usually some kind of acrylic paint that allows you to use whiteboard markers on the walls. This is becoming more and more common in some universities around the globe. And of course we have smartboards. There are many different models out there that they have their own software, and of course you need a computer to be able to use them. No matter the kind of board you use, there are some generalities and some tips that we can take into account. First, we need to choose our writing tools well. If you're using a blackboard or green board, in this case, you need to try all the different types of chalk that you can find. There are different brands. Some of them are harder, some of them are softer. So you need to try and see which brand works for you and for your purposes. And there's no science for this. It's just trial and error. And if you're using a whiteboard, well, there are again many different brands of markers, and there are basically two types. So you need to look at the nib. The picture you see here is about chisel markers. So this type of nib is called chisel. The other type is called a bullet, which will create a finer line. I recommend using chisel markers because this allows you to write bold letters and it's easier for the students to read. And this kind of marker also helps you write more easily. So no matter the brand you find, try to choose chisel markers and they will help you write better. It's also important to distribute the writing space on the board. It's not a good idea to write as much as you can from one side to the other, because this will be distracting for the students and it's going to be hard for them to read a very long line. So it's better to divide the space into as many portions as you can. In this case I have 3 subsections. Of course this all depends on how big your board is, but at least there should be 2 main writing areas so you can distribute the writing. And in this case you will be writing shorter lines, which will be easier to read for your students. And you can choose one side to write your agenda for the day, and then instructions for the activity, and probably some additional information in the remaining space. This will help you organize your board better, and it will help you follow. It will help your students follow you better. Now we need to think about handwriting ability. And my recommendation is to use the best handwriting you can. I know No one's perfect, and there are many different types of um, handwriting out there, but you need to try and use the best you can. It's also a good idea to avoid cursive writing because it's hard to read from a distance. You also need to check the size you're using. One tip to check this is to go to the back of your classroom and look at what you have written and see if it's large enough, or you need to use a larger size for your students to read well. And you should also try not to write with a slant. It's common for you to start writing, and when you realize you're slightly going down or up, your handwriting should be as leveled as possible. So you need to constantly check on the alignment you're using. Choosing the right colors to write is also important. So always choose dark, bold colors to write, such as white if you're using a black board or green board, black, blue, or some other dark color for a whiteboard, so they create good contrast and it's easy to read. And to underline and attract attention, draw lines, arrows, and so on, you can use the other colors such as red, green, yellow. Because if you write with red, green, and yellow, it's going to be very difficult for your students to make sense of what you're writing on the board, especially if they are not making good contrast with the color of the board. So always keep this in mind. There are some general recommendations as well. Do not speak and write at the same time. I know we are always in a race against time, and we feel, okay, I'm not going to be able to make it, I need to write faster. And then you start giving your students instructions, but you're actually speaking to your board and turning your back on your students, so they will not understand. So one way to go about this is to plan the flow of your activities. So if you need some time to write on the board, give your students something to do, some exercise in the book, some conversation questions. So while they're engaged in the activity, so you'll have time to write on the board, and that way you'll not be in a pickle trying to speak and write at the same time. You also need to be careful with reflections on your board. There could be light coming from the outside, and when it hits the board, it makes it difficult to read. So you need to move it around the classroom, check on that. Probably you may need to close the door, turn off the light. It's also important to clean the board carefully. There are different resources that you can use. Just a simple eraser. You can find cleaning liquids in most stationery stores. And it's also a sign of respect for the next teacher. And it's important for you to leave a clean board so the next teacher does not have to hurry and delete whatever you left on the board. It's something really annoying when you come to a classroom and the previous teacher didn't care about deleting or erasing all the writing on the board. And you should not freak out with permanent markers. This may happen to you sometime. You write and you don't know if the marker you're using is permanent or it can be erased. So if you're not sure, just write a small line in one corner, then try to erase it. If you can't, well, you have a permanent marker. Then what happens if you come to a classroom and the board is all full of writing and it's permanent ink? Well, you can use the cleaning liquid I mentioned. If you don't have that, well, you can use a whiteboard marker. Just write on top of the permanent ink and start deleting it. It's going to take time, but you will be able to remove the permanent ink. And here are our references.